This myth is seductive because it feels generous. It feels like leadership. It feels like responsibility. It feels like maturity. You're not ignoring your health, you're prioritizing others. You're being a good leader, a good colleague, a good friend, a good parent or carer, and a good human. And people praise you for it. Oh, you're always there. You're such a support. I don't know how you do it. But praise is not the same as sustainability, and generosity without boundaries becomes depletion. There's a quiet promise many leaders make to themselves, a promise that sounds responsible, even noble. I'll look after myself later. Later, when the project ends, later, when the team stabilizes, later, when things calm down. But here's the truth: later is a moving target, and leaders who wait for later rarely arrive. Welcome back to the Leadership Longevity Podcast. I'm Elizabeth Hughes, and we're exploring a myth that feels reasonable, even virtuous, but quietly erodes your capacity to lead well. It's the myth that tells you your health can wait and that you'll get to yourself once everything else is handled, that stamina will carry you through. This is the myth of deferral. And if you've ever postponed your own needs because someone else needed you more, often work, this is the one for you. Inside the leadership longevity ecosystem, this myth sits within survivor driver one, the health depletion pattern that we've already spoken about. This survival driver fractures your internal layer, your adaptive conditions, the part of the ecosystem that holds your biology, your psychology, your energy, your cognitive load, your emotional bandwidth, and your recovery cycles. At the center of that internal layer sits your high-value operating system, which includes your endurance, recovery, adaptation, and rhythm. The four events that determine how your internal rhythm stabilizes under load. Deferral teaches you to treat your health as flexible, negotiable, or something you'll attend to once things settle. But in regenerative leadership, health isn't a reward, it's an infrastructure. Across this season, you'll hear me reference the ecosystem, the living system that holds your internal and external conditions. You don't need the full map yet. Just for now, know this: that deferral fractures the system at its foundation, not through force, but through delay. The myth of deferral says, I'll look after myself later. It tells you your health is flexible, your needs are negotiable, your well-being can be scheduled for a quieter season, but quieter seasons rarely come, and deferral becomes a lifestyle. So here's the lived reality of this myth. You're the one person people come to, the steady one, the reliable one, the emotional anchor for your team, your family, your friends, your board. You're carrying the invisible load, the worries, the tensions, the unspoken fears. And because you're so focused on supporting everyone else, your own needs get pushed to the edges. You tell yourself you'll rest later, you'll breathe later, you'll take care of yourself later. But later keeps moving. You skip lunch because someone needs you. You answer messages at 9:30 p.m. because it feels much easier than stopping. You tell yourself, I'll rest on the weekend, but the weekend arrives already full. And I've lived this pattern too, the quiet postponing, the I'll get to myself soon promise that never quite lands. This myth is seductive because it feels generous. It feels like leadership. It feels like responsibility. It feels like maturity. You're not ignoring your health, you're prioritizing others. You're being a good leader, a good colleague, a good friend, a good parent or carer, and a good human. And people praise you for it. Oh, you're always there. You're such a support. I don't know how you do it. But praise is not the same as sustainability, and generosity without boundaries becomes depletion. A leader I've supported, let's just call them Alex, embodied this myth in ways I've seen many times. Alex was the emotional anchor of their team. If someone was overwhelmed, they went to Alex. If someone was confused, they went to Alex. If someone was upset, they went to Alex. Alex held everything: the work, the people, the emotions, the unspoken tensions, and they were brilliant at it. But every time I asked, "How are you?" Alex would say, "I'll be fine. I'll be okay once this project is over." But the project ended and another began and then another. And one day after a particularly heavy week, Alex said, "I keep telling myself I'll take care of myself later, but later never comes." And then I think I've been waiting for permission. That's when it became clear Alex wasn't choosing deferral, they were caught in it. The way so many high capacity leaders are. They believed their needs were negotiable. They believed their health was flexible. They believed they had to earn rest. And that belief was costing them more than they realized. And let's be really honest here, this myth isn't theoretical for me either. There have been many seasons in my career where I've told myself, my body can wait, my health can wait. I just need to focus right now. And every time it meant the same thing: convenient meals, movement when or if the stars aligned, sleep pushed to the edges. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet, constant postponing. And it wasn't until I made one small practical shift at one stage, a tiny experiment that fit inside the life I already had, that I realized something important. I wasn't lacking discipline. I was living inside deferral. And the moment I stopped postponing myself, everything else softened, everything stabilized, and everything became much more possible. There is, of course, some science behind this, and science becomes grounding and honestly a little confronting when we look at it. The first concept is one called future self continuity. It describes how connected you feel to the older version of yourself, the one you'll become in 10, 20, 40 years, depending on your own way, right? So for many leaders, that future self feels distant, abstract, almost like another person. And when your future self feels like a stranger, your brain does something predictable. It prioritizes the urgent over the important. It invests in today at the expense of tomorrow. It defers health because the consequences feel far away. But your future self isn't a stranger. They're you with more years, more wisdom, and fewer buffers. However, the compounding effect of small behaviors is another interesting scientific foundation. So we think about tiny actions repeated consistently that create exponential change. So, say for example, a 10-minute walk doesn't change your life, unless, of course, there's a catastrophic event. But a decade of 10-minute walks absolutely does. A single night of good sleep won't transform your health. But years of protecting your sleep reshape your cognition, your emotional steadiness, and your long term resilience. And that's why deferral is just so costly. Because when you actually postpone the small actions, you're not just losing the action itself, you're losing the compounding effect that would have shaped your future capacity. And when you invest in small actions today, you're not just improving today, you're building the body, the brain, the capacity your 80 or 100-year-old self will absolutely rely on. So, deferral is the quietest form of self abandonment. It's the belief that everyone else's needs matter a bit more than yours, that your well-being is optional and that your health is something you'll earn later. But you can't lead from a place you don't inhibit, and you can't support others from a self you've postponed. Inside the ecosystem, deferral fractures the high-value operating system, specifically the sequence of recovery, adaptation, and rhythm. Endurance breaks this sequence through override. Deferral breaks it through delay. Both erode the foundation your leadership depends on, and both quietly reduce your future capacity long before you even notice the cost. So, your health is not something you tend to later. It's something you invest in today so your future self can thank you. And when I talk about health, I'm talking about the full architecture of your later life: the strength, mobility, cognition, emotional steadiness, social connection, and financial dependence that determine your freedom in your marginal decade or the last decades of your life. This is the longevity layer of the ecosystem, what I call the longevity horizon training blueprint. And for short, the training blueprint. 10 or more future self commitments across 5 domains: physical, social, cognitive, emotional, and financial. Every choice you make today is a deposit or a withdrawal from your future self. And nothing is wrong with you. You've simply been taught to prioritize the urgent over the important. Your future self deserves better, not as a performance metric, not as a guilt trip, but as a compass. So, under the myth of deferral, our tiny experiment is actually to choose one micro action from any domain of the longevity horizon training blueprint. Just one, and make it happen today. It could be a 10-minute walk, which is the physical piece, a message to a friend, the social, reading one page of something that stretches your mind, cognitive, 60-second grounding pause for the emotional, or perhaps reviewing one reoccurring expense from a financial perspective. It doesn't matter which domain you choose, only that you choose it now, not later. Because, of course, deferral lives in the gap between I will and I did. A tiny experiment closes the gap. You might then like to engage in a reflective question. What am I postponing today that my future self, the one I'm training for in my training blueprint, needs me to prioritize now? So, our ecosystem practice. So, from the myth of deferral, we're going to choose one domain in our Horizon training blueprint and make one small weekly investment in that domain. Just one domain, just one investment every week. This isn't self-care. This is leadership infrastructure, the steady, predictable investment your future self will rely on. This is how you build the long-term capacity your leadership actually needs. This is how you create a future you can inhabit without depletion. And this is how you shift from postponing yourself to protecting yourself. Be the leader your future self will thank you for. So, releasing the myth of deferral feels like stepping back into your own timeline. It feels like time widening, priorities aligning, your future self becoming someone you actively honor rather than someone you continually delay. It's steady, intentional, quietly liberating. It feels like choosing yourself without apology. It feels like leadership that includes you. In our next episode, we're moving deeper into survival driver 1, the health depletion pattern, and exploring the third myth in this arc, the myth of health as a perk. It's the belief that health is personal, optional, or something you attend to only when everything else is handled. If deferral is a myth of postponing, this next one is the myth of minimizing. And it quietly shapes the culture of every team you lead. I'll meet you there.